So I am preaching. This is our second week of Jesus and politics. And so kind of one of the questions that I think a lot of people kind of process through is, especially as Americans, I'm focusing as an American church. Most of you at this moment are in America, so some of you are, in planes, but most of us are here in America. So this is something, November 3rd is the election day, and this is something you're going to hear a lot about and process through, and a lot of voices, including strong Christian leadership, talk about God and who he wants you to vote for and how he wants you to vote. And so it's this question, does God care who you vote for? And so really what I'm looking at in the next few weeks is this: how should Christians approach politics? Many of us know how Christians do approach politics, and I think some of us have seen leaders and who approach politics in a really certain way. But what does the Bible tell us? What are kind of the Bible wasn't written to a democratic republic in the 21st century. It wasn't. It was written in a different time. Jesus didn't vote. That wasn't something that he did. And so how do we take some of the principles that are in the Bible and apply them to our own lives today and think, okay, how are we supposed to take these principles and connect them to what we're experiencing today? And so that's really what we're looking at. And so last week, Rebecca presented this message of thick skin and tender hearts. It's a really pithy saying, like, oh yeah, thick skin, tender hearts. It's super difficult to do. This idea of God is calling us as Christians to be able to take things that are offensive and not find offense to them. Right? Throughout the history of the church, one of its kind of key characteristics have been its ability to not take offense at offensive things. Is that how you and I would describe the American church today? I don't know if it is for you. I don't know if that's how I would do it. But throughout history, Christians have been called to follow after Jesus. The example of Jesus was someone who had an incredibly thick skin, an ability to take insult, an ability to take offense, and to not hold it against those who were presenting it, but to kind of cut through it and to speak to the person underneath. So thick skins and tender hearts is something that we strive for. Now, don't feel bad if you're not perfect at it. You fit right in here, right? We're imperfect people, but it is something that we are striving for, and we hold it up. And so I'm so thankful for Rebecca to represent that last weekend. In the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at the power of empathy. It's something that is amazingly powerful, but most of us don't think of empathy as a strength. But we're also looking at Christians in authority, the way we approach authority and how we think about authority. And then Jesus in the ballot box will be the last Sunday before November 1st, right before election. But so before that, I wanted to start with this message on what is your favorite flavor. Now, Al, will you grab that bag for me? So I was thinking about what's your favorite flavor of snack. Right, and so we're going to take a quick scientific poll this morning on, we're going to do a science experiment on what is your favorite flavor. So we take one of those bags out and put it on each one of these. Let's see. So here we have Takis. If any of you have ever had Takis, Takis are a spicy snack that turn your fingers and your insides bright orange. And they're very spicy, and make sure you have a drink with them. And here we have the classic Lay's potato chip. Right? It's a salty snack, and Rebecca likes it for the crunch, but I don't really understand that. And here are obviously the best, which is the chocolate wax covered, delicious. And I can coat your insides as they go down donuts. Now, so what is your favorite flavor? So I just want, as a show of hands, we're going to kind of see who. So how many of you are the most righteous and believe that the donuts would be your favorite snack? What do you think? So maybe a little bit more than a third. What about potato chips? Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be these potato chips, but potato chips have any kind. Okay, about another third. And what about Takis? Wow, so spicy. So we have salty, spicy, and a sweet here. And I also had, where's my bag? I had something else in there, didn't I? Yeah. So are any of you gigantic dorks that prefer an apple? All right, there we are. Look at you. So, this message isn't for you. No. So, what's your favorite flavor? Now, what's crazy about that is how many of you had to really think about it, or how many of you just kind of instinctively knew what your favorite flavor was? You know, I love sweet things. I married Rebecca. Thank you. That was good. Sweet is my favorite of these flavors. Although, obviously, I like all snacks, right? I'm not all that discriminatory when it comes to snacks. But most of us don't have to think about what our favorite flavor is. Okay? And so I want to use this as kind of an overarching metaphor for how we make moral decisions. And I'm using this thing, moral decisions, but I want us to put in here political decisions, because for most of us, our political bent, our political mindset is connected to morality in our brains in some way or another. Generally, we vote for someone or support a party because we believe that they are morally superior in their stances than others. And what's interesting is, I was watching this thing that Andy Stanley presented about Christians in politics, and he says that Christians so for him, they will often come to him and say, Pastor Stanley, why don't you preach more about how Christians should be Republican? Or why don't you preach more about how Christians should be Democrats? And then they unveil this litany of Bible verses that prove that they're right. He says so often they use exactly the same verses, right? And you're saying, okay, often if you want to make Jesus a Democrat, you can find verses that make him a Democrat. If you want to make him a Republican, you can find verses that make him a Republican. If you want him to be a libertarian, you can use the Message version and find all sorts of stuff that make that work. But we are, of translation jokes. So how do we make moral decisions? Now, this is going to be a little bit nerdy here at the beginning. Moral psychology is kind of something that I've started to read a lot about and study because I think it's fascinating. And I want to talk to you a little bit about the way that me and you, make moral decisions, how we decide if something is morally accurate or it isn't. Now, they have done these studies in moral psychology that have proven basically across the board that intuition comes first. You intuitively know what you believe is right and wrong. You just intuitively do it. Okay, and one of the ways that they have kind of discovered this is they gave people a heavy mental load so they say, I want you to remember the number 7613974178898. Right, and they're studying this and trying to think about it. You can write it down, you just have to remember it. And then as they're remembering that, they present them with moral problems and say which one is morally correct, and they'll lean one way or the other. And they studied it in morality. There's no difference in the way they choose when they're remembering a really difficult number versus, I want you to remember the number 7. Okay, remember the number 7. That's easy mental load, right? And then, so it seems that moral decisions and your brain's capacity to handle a mental load are separate. So there's something deeper down where your morality comes from. In what Jonathan Haidt, who is actually a professor at UVA, he wrote this whole book on how intuition guides us when we make moral decisions. And that's one of the reasons why, it's deep down in, it's one of the reasons why it's so divisive. Right, and here we have an elephant with a rider on top of it. Now, most people think, how do you come to moral decisions? Most of you would say, well, I think about it, and weigh out the reasons, and I come to kind of a conclusion. And there have been many philosophers who try to develop this kind of reasonable approach to morality, but for the most part, people don't like it. Why? Because we're really not people. We're people riding an elephant. And the elephant is our kind of emotional intuition part of us that is really in charge. And it's really the strength behind what we do. And what happens is that when the elephant makes these decisions, the rider just kind of goes along with it. And we're going to look at that here in a second. So they did this study that kind of determined that another study that was really interesting, and I wanted you to hold on to this, is twins twin study, identical twins, not fraternal, but identical twins. So same genetic makeup. And especially with twins, they study twins who are identical twins but raised in different families. And they have found across the board that genetics is a better indicator on how you're going to vote than the house you grew up in is. They over and over and over again, they've come up with this thing that your genes make you either more liberal or more conservative. And this divide is not just in American politics, it's all throughout the history of politics. You have those who want to conserve more and those who want to be more progressive and to see more change. Genetics has more to do with that than your parents, how your parents voted, where you came from. Now, the house you grew up with matters. It does. And you're influenced by people you care about. They can influence how you think. That absolutely is a part of it. But it's not as a strong indicator as our genetics are. Which goes back to this idea that there's something about the way you're made. And as Christians, we would say the way God made you, that make you lean either liberal or conservative. And so, God made your neighbor different than you, and that's one of the reasons why you guys are going to vote for two different people. Right? That's kind of, and so when I first read this, I was like, why don't we talk about this more? Why isn't this more, why don't we bring this up more? And then I thought, well, I talk about things all the time. Why don't I talk about it? So here we are. So intuitions come first. Reasons come second. This is the way we do a lot of things in our lives. That we kind of post hoc, that after the fact, we bring our reasonable minds into, think about your reasonable brain is kind of your lawyer to your emotional elephant. So the elephant's going this way, and the lawyer says, well, let me explain to you why that is correct, and it's the right way. And so often that we bring in our own kind of logical and moral reasoning to explain the direction we're already headed. And it's not to determine which direction we're going to head. Now, some people, the kind of reasoning part of them has a little bit more control of their emotions than others. Others were kind of emotional 2-year-olds, and our kind of elephant is gigantic, and our person is really small. And maturity and where we come from in life, those things can change a little bit. But basically, people develop reasons and the logic to back up the decisions they've already made. One of the things that they did is that they had a study. People would come in and they would present them with a moral problem, right? And there was all sorts of different topics that they would come up with. One of them was like, hey, this person cut up an American flag and used it as a rags. Is that morally correct or not incorrect? And one of them was one of them, they came home, they found their dog had died, and they cut it up and ate it. Is that right or wrong, right? And so they created these stories, and then what they did is they removed all of the reasons that it would be wrong, right? Well, maybe they were going to get sick. No, they're not going to be sick. So they removed all of the reasons that you can come up with why this was wrong. And then people would make the moral decision, and then they would think, okay, why did you make that moral decision? And then they would think for a while, like, well, maybe it's because of this. And they were like, well, no, it can't be that. The story said it wasn't. Oh, well, maybe it was this. Like, no, that the story said that's not the case either. Well, I just think it's wrong anyways. Well, do you have a reason for it? No, but I know it's wrong. Like, that's over and over and over again. This is how people responded. If you and I were put in that same moral psychological study, we would do the same thing. You would make decisions. That doesn't feel right. That seems wrong to me. And then we come up after the fact, because we don't want to seem irrational and simply emotional, we come up with reasons why we believe it. Reasons come second. So we have intuition comes first, reason comes second, right? And then we also have this tendency as people to do this. We have a tendency towards tribalism. And basically what I mean by tribalism is we lump people who like donuts. Come on, where are my donut folks? We're Tribe Donut. Woo! Let's go Tribe Donut, right? We're obviously the best tribe, right? And these weirdos over here that like Takis, which are gross and turn your insides orange, They're in a different tribe. They're tribe spices, right? And so as tribe sweet, which is obviously the best, we don't really like tribe spicy. We do this all the time in all sorts of things. If you don't agree with me, go to sports. You have people, normally rational, put together, intelligent people, and they come, they painted their faces, they put on their uniforms, and they go and they scream profanities at people who look different than them and wearing different paint. And I stopped going to NFL games because I don't want to be around these crazy people, right? I'd rather be in my home. Like, we do this all the time. We divide into tribes. We love to do it. Why? It helps our brains understand, okay, if these people are in my tribe, I can trust them. And all these other people, I don't know if I can trust them, but at least I have some people I can trust, and I'm safe because there's other donut folks around me. Woo, Team Donut, right? And this is how we divide up into it. And we do this over and over again. There's this famous study that Jane Elliott did where she had this elementary school class, and she divided them into brown eyes and blue eyes. And then in the study, she talked to which you couldn't do this nowadays because it'd be borderline child abuse, but she told all the kids who had brown eyes that blue-eyed kids were dumb. And blue-eyed kids, were mischievous, and blue-eyed kids wanted to steal your stuff, and you couldn't trust those with blue eyes. And then over the next few weeks, these kids turned into tribes, and you saw how the brown-eyed kids begin to abuse blue-eyed kids based upon just this arbitrary decision on whether or not who was who. Just, your eyes are blue, you're worse than, your eyes are brown, then you're better. And they did all this study on how quickly and easily these kids fell into that division. And they loved it. They took to it like fish in water because they were like tribes. We understand it's ingrained into who we are, right? And if you want to see how this plays out in real life, you can look at it's the Hutus and the Tutsis, right? They were divided arbitrarily by the Dutch government. You are going to be this class, and you are going to be this class. And then in 46 years, I don't know, my history's not that great, but and a few decades later, they were murdering each other. Why? Based upon some division that was made by someone just arbitrarily. We do this. We arbitrarily divide each, and if we really care that much about it, we could get in an argument over who's better, donuts or Takis. And then we could be screaming at each other by the end of this service, and someone could come in from the outside and be like, this is a weird church. We do this naturally, and we just kind of fall into it. And we also play roles. Another famous experiment was the Stanford prison experiment, where they took all of these Stanford students, and they made a prison, a fake prison. And they listed, okay, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, And they would say, if you're 1, you're a guard. If you're 2, you're a prisoner. And they just divided them out like that. And then they locked them into this place. Again, I don't know if they could do this nowadays. It would be kind of controversial. But within a few days, those who had been arbitrarily listed as 1s, who are now the guards, begin to mistreat the 2s, who are now prisoners, treat them like less than human, and treat them like garbage. And then the 2s, which is really interesting the implications is really kind of interesting when you talk about our prison systems. The 2s began to become more deviant. They gang together. They developed hatred for the 1s. And then they began to sneak around and do all sorts. And it's a fascinating experience. They fell into these roles of guards and prisoners, and they're all Stanford students. They're all high-achieving, intelligent, hardworking, and they fell into these roles. And they had to shut down the experiment because it got too crazy. Because they started hurting each other and started doing some crazy stuff. And they were shocked at how quickly people fell into the role of criminal or fell into the role of authoritarian. And And realize, and this experiment has been redone several times in different ways, less kind of abusive ways. But we find out over and over again that people fall into the roles that they're expected to play. So when you become Tribe Donut, you're not going to be caught dead eating no chips.
That's right.
Because that's Tribe Chips. And those guys are weird, right? And then we don't, and then all of a sudden, all you care about is sugar. And anything that even looks like salt or, God forbid, spice, gets pushed even further away from it. We don't do that. We're Tribe Donut. Right? We fall into these. So, again, intuition comes first when we're making these decisions. We develop the reasoning and thought afterwards to justify why our intuition's walking the way it is. We fall into these tribes because we're walking this way and we look around and other elephants are walking with us. We must all be a part of the same tribe. And that team over there that chose the different path, well, we don't really agree with them. And it becomes more and more ingrained in who we are. We kind of start playing the roles that we're expected to play within our tribes. And this is a big one for us today, is the truth of confirmation bias. All of us do this. None of us can say, well, I don't do that. Yes, you do. All of us do this. Here's how it works. You decide something is correct, right? We already decided something is correct. You develop the reasons behind it. You're walking in that way. You've become part of this tribe. You're playing the role. And then any kind of information or news or evidence that supports you becomes really, really powerful and dynamically true. Oh, that's really true. Wow, yeah, that's really... And anything that contradicts you, you think, well, that's just fake news, or that's just a lie. There must be something nefarious about that. That can't be true if it goes against what I know to be true. Oh, that must be they're trying to trick me, or they're trying to change something. And all of a sudden, the things that we agree with become really, really true, and the things we disagree with become wrong and evil and bad. And then it becomes obvious that what we believe is true, because look at all this evidence, and there's just this weak, crummy evidence against it, but that's just all fake anyways. I was having this conversation with a friend of mine, and he was presenting an argument, and I didn't necessarily disagree with his argument. I was just saying, well, have you thought about this other way of looking at it? And he kept saying this, which was interesting to me, and I didn't really think about it until later. He's like, John, it's obvious that this is the truth. It's obvious that this is, and how could you deny it? It's obvious. Look at all this evidence. And if you did disagree with me, you either are willfully blind, or you're dumb, and I don't think you're dumb, or you don't want it to be true, so you refuse to allow it to be true, and you want something different to be in play here. And so, I can't believe you can't see what's so obvious. And we do this all the time. You do this in your own head. You think, well, man, it's so obvious to vote for the person I voted. Why would you not vote for him? Look at how shady this guy is. And whenever you see pictures of him, he's in like that monochrome and like the weird music that comes on the political ad. It's like, look how evil that guy looks. And look, my guy's in like nice soft light. He's hugging puppies. Like, come on. You don't like puppies? Like, what's wrong with you? And we fall into this cycle, this echo chamber of confirmation bias, where we will only listen to things that we agree with. And before you be like, well, other people do that, I know. Yeah, you do. Yeah, we do. We all do it. Some of us, it's a bigger trap than others. Agreed. But we all kind of fall into this trap. And so it becomes this kind of storm. You see how this is like this crazy divisive thing that's happening. Your intuitions of loving donuts, because obviously they're the best, all of a sudden has created a tribe around you. And has created this idea of, like, if anyone would even argue that Takis are better than donuts, they're either, so obviously that they're wrong, they either have some ulterior motive, or they're trying to trick me, or they're just really dumb. And then, our culture has really fallen into this. We have divided the world into good and evil. Amen. So our tribe is the good tribe, and the other tribes are the evil tribe. And here's why this is so insidious. Is because we begin to believe that good people have to do everything in their power to stop evil people. And if the evil people win, right? And we've known from birth that that's not what we want. You can't let evil people win, so good have to win at all costs. And even as so, and this evil person comes and he makes this rational, thoughtful argument, and you think, well, that makes sense, but wait, no. That's the devil trying to whisper lies into my ear. I can't let that evil person win even have an inch. And we've done this as a culture over and over again, over all sorts of different things. Politically, over all sorts of the question of abortion, marriage rights, even think gun rights. Pick your favorite points, and we divide this between good and evil. And if good people don't stand up, then the evil people are going to win, and you can't let evil people. And that's why you see these violent interactions around. It's so funny, these hateful interactions over, you guys need to be more loving and more open, and so we hate each other. Or these hateful, these violent, frictionless interactions between people who are like, this is my right, and you can't take this right away from me. So in that moment, they're going to steal the rights from someone else, the rights of freedom and the rights of security. We do this over and over again, and guess what? There is not a party or a side that doesn't have blood on their hands, including the church. Okay, so all of this is not, I haven't mentioned the Bible once yet. Right? This is all kind of moral psychology. These are conclusions that I didn't come to, that I was discovered by reading multiple different people that are experts in this field. This is how we do it. And the conclusion they come to is we all do it. None of us are innocent of doing this. We all do it. And so I think as Christians, we need to say, okay, I got a name for this. It's called my sinful nature. My nature that is all about me first. My nature that wants to give me what I want, wants to take care of my rights, and it feeds this thing. And I'm not saying rights are a bad thing. They're not. I think they're God-given. I don't think even having a passionate, strong stance on something, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. I think Jesus promotes that in our lives. But to fall into this trap that we all do, where we allow the kind of emotional, intuitive elephant to decide things, and then we justify what we do, and we gather those around us, and we don't listen to others, and it's this cycle that we get into, and we end up with a broken and divided world, and community, and families, and marriages, and it has so much to do with this. And guys, it's a part of who we are. And so to pretend like we don't do it, or to think we're not as bad as it, it's not really helpful. Or to think, oh man, I'm so terrible, what a worm, how terrible, I can't believe I do this. I don't think that's what Jesus is calling us to do. But I do think Jesus is saying, okay, when you understand that you're fallen and a broken person in a fallen and broken world, that you need to find wholeness and healing in God's direction for you in your life. And Jesus doesn't tell us how to vote, but he does tell us how to counteract this abusive system in our own lives. And he does it all over the place, but I'm just going to pick out this one, the parable of the Good Samaritan, found in Luke 10, 25 to 37. So what happens, and I'm going to just set this up this way, I'm not going to read the whole thing, it's a little bit lengthy, but here's what happens. This lawyer, right, the lawyer's the bad guy, shocking. But he comes up and he's trying to justify himself. He's trying to trick Jesus into saying something. He's bad. He goes, okay, Jesus, would you tell me, what is the greatest commandment? What does God really want us to do more than anything else? And Jesus says, that's a good question, and you know the answer, and I know the answer, and everyone in this room knows the answer, right? And this is Jesus talking to the guy. He says, we all know that God tells us above everything to love God with everything we have, and to love our neighbors with that kind of love. And he's like, okay, I got you. Here's my legal argument. And Jesus, okay, Jesus, why don't you, in this world that we have, that the first century Jews had enemies all over the place, says, well, Jesus, who's your neighbor? Is it the Pharisees? Is it the Sadducees? Is it the Essenes? Is it the tax collectors and the prostitutes? Is it the Roman occupiers? Jesus, tell me, who is your neighbor? Luke 10:29, but he wanted to justify himself. Isn't that at the heart of so much of what we do? We're just trying to convince ourselves and others that we're right, and we're justified in how we are and who we are. Jesus has a way of addressing that justifying problem. But here's the guy, he says that he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus smugly, that's my translation, and who is your neighbor? And then Jesus, as he always does, he tells a story. And he tells this story where the normal heroes, the normal like mega church pastor, super holy Christian man, the guy who's like the heroes that we think of, the heroes of the faith, they had Pharisees and priests that were their heroes at that time. Pharisees from one group, the Pharisees were the Republicans, the priests were the Democrats. This is your leader walking down the street. He sees this guy who's been beat up. And they look at him and they're like, man, I'm wearing really nice clothes and he's all bloody. Somebody else got him. And here comes the Republican Pharisees walking down thinking, man, he's got his MAGA hat on. He looks over here and he says, that guy's all beat up. And he's like, I'm late for a meeting. I got to go to the rally. And he keeps going. And then here comes the racially, theologically, culturally, whatever Lee you want to add on to outcast. And he comes down. He's a Samaritan. They hated the Samaritans. So much that if they were in the same room, they'd have to go take a bath. That's that's nasty hate. Right? And he takes this Samaritan, and the Samaritan looks, and he sees that person who's a Jew, who he's not allowed to touch. He's not allowed to interact with, but he sees that person needs my help. And even though there's these cultural and racial and theological divides, I'm going to go and help this guy. And Jesus masterfully makes the hated person the hero in this story. And then he looks back at the smug lawyer and he says, which of these three men do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robber? And everyone knows the answer to that. And they're all going, oh, he's got to say it. He's got to say it. And the expert of the law replied, he wouldn't even call him a Samaritan. He's just the one guy who had mercy on him. And so Jesus looks at him and says, okay, I want you to go out and act like a Samaritan. Jesus, who's the hero? Is it the Republicans or the Democrats? And he says, I want you to be a Samaritan. This is why Jesus got killed, by the way, is because he wouldn't fall into what they wanted him to fall into. He wouldn't do what they wanted him to do. He's pushing back on him. He says, you need to be like a Samaritan. Later on in Scripture, he says, hey, super holy person, you need to act like this prostitute. You need to act like this tax collector, this traitor, this Benedictine. He keeps doing it. He keeps making people uncomfortable and frustrated. Why? Because time after time after time, Jesus, he crosses over the political divides. And he crosses over the cultural, and the moral, and the racial, and the theological divides. Listen, some of these people came to the conclusions that they had because they were really, really good Bible study masters of this stuff. They were theological scholars that they decided this is what God tells me to do. And then Jesus says, why are you doing that? And they're like, well, because God says. He's like, that's not what God says. You missed out. He keeps crossing over these lines, political lines and moral lines, and he's treating everyone and challenging others to treat people with love and dignity, regardless of anything that divides them. It's like, I don't care if you like Takis. They're great. Sometimes the potato chips, come on, I love potato chips. Donuts, that waxy feel that coats your esophagus, who doesn't love that? Right? And he crosses over these tribal markers that we have. And he says, look, I see that you're a person. The Bible says every person, including Democrats, every person, including Republicans, and including libertarians, and independents, whatever that means. Every person is endowed with the image of God in their life, and you don't get to take that away from them, including yourself. You don't get to take it away from yourself. So you need to treat every single person you come across with love and dignity.
That's right.
And you need to treat them with that first.
Right.
It's not that you can't talk about, Jesus had theological debates. And he had moral debates. And he talked through some of this stuff. And he came to a tax collector's house. And he had a really difficult conversation with that man. But he did it after eating dinner with him. Right? He treated him. He treats people. It's one of the reasons he got killed. It's because he's going to hang out with prostitutes. Like, you can't hang out with the sexually, permissive people. No, you can't do that, Jesus. I thought you were a man of God. You can't go to the political traitors. Did you know who they voted for? Why are you hanging out with them? Over and over again, Jesus keeps saying, no, I don't care about that stuff. I care about them. I care about who they are and the image of God in their life. And he would draw that out of people. And he had difficult conversations, and he stood his ground on stuff, but he always did it from this empathetic, compassionate stance of love and dignity. And then he's got the audacity to say, okay, now I want you to do it. Now all of you pull up your Facebook feeds, and I want you to read out the past few posts. Right? Guys, this is, if we're going to call ourselves Christians, which means followers of Christ, little Christ, we're going to, like, can you think of a mama duck and her little ducklings and falling behind them? If you are going to bear the mantle of Christian, then this is what you have to do. And we don't give that choice. Now, you have the choice of whether or not you're going to identify with Christ or not. But if you identify with Christ, this is the challenge. He says, church, who is your neighbor? Where are your priorities? Again, I'm not telling you to vote for it, But where are your priorities? How do you see those who vote different and think different? How do you see those who may be on as far as the church goes, the sexual outcast or the political outcast or the racial outcast? How do you approach those people? Are you willing to actually follow Christ? Where are your priorities? Paul, wrestling through this, says, look, this is the reality of who Jesus is. That when we come to Jesus, there is no Jew or Greek. There's neither slave nor free. There's not male or female. There's not spicy or salty or sweet tribe. There's none of those things that divide us. You don't get to bring that junk with you. You leave it at the door, because for you, when you come to Jesus, you are all one in Christ Jesus.
Amen. Amen.
Right? So as a church, in this political season, we have an opportunity. You have an opportunity to try to convince people to vote the way you do, or you have an opportunity to represent the unity of Jesus Christ in a broken and disunified world. And God's going to give you that opportunity. I feel like he does all the time. Like, what are you going to choose? Again, vote. You're conscious. Think through who you're going to vote for November 3rd. We can talk about that, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But this is kind of the foundation for me. This is the foundation where it has to start. Are we going to be thin-skinned and hard-hearted people? The world's full of that. What does that distinguish us from anything? But are we going to actually live up to our name and do the best we can to actually follow in the steps of Christ, who, when asked a politically charged question, would always point to the dignity and the love of the person underneath it? Because there is no Jew or Greek. There's no racial divide. There's no economic divide. There's not even to the center core, the power divide of male and female. None of that matters. Because when Jesus comes in, he forces us to get in line with who he is and say, this is how I expect you to act. Now go and, like what did he say in Luke 10? He says, go and do likewise. Go and do likewise. This is the challenge for all of us. Okay, so this is I'm going to come to a conclusion. I'm going to ask my worship leader to come to. So how do you respond to this? Like, what's the challenge for us today? And this is church. I want us to walk through this, and I want us to recognize our patterns. Notice I didn't say change your patterns. I mean, recognize your patterns. Recognize the way that we come to these. Like some of you, certain aspects of political life or moral life. We're going to talk a little bit more about this next week when we talk about empathy. Understanding why people make decisions. And understanding that sometimes on the surface we're talking about one thing. But underneath we're talking about two completely separate things. But recognize that this is the way we make decisions, and not that you're horrible and evil for making decisions this way, but realize that God, I'm not always right. Why do you think He teaches us to pray daily, God, your will and your kingdom? Because your will, Bruce, and your kingdom, Gary, isn't what we really want, right? We want to have God's kingdom and God's will in our lives because He knows more than we do. So recognize our patterns in our lives and do the best that you can to resist this desire for tribalism and to resist this confirmation bias and to resist, if anything, the demonization of those who think differently. Right. We're not the good versus the evil. We can't divide the world up in that pattern. Those who vote different from you are not evil. That's right. We all are falling short. Don't fall into that trap because just because they may look different or act different or even think different or even have some evil aspects of stuff, it doesn't make them evil. And it doesn't make them the enemy. Jesus says He died for all of us. And He loves them more than you. And He commands us to love enemies and to love those who are different, to love and persecute. So resist tribalism, confirmation bias, and demonization of others. And we're going to talk more and more about this, but practice empathy and compassion. The story of Jesus is the story of empathy. The Bible, the reason the Bible presents it as it is, it says God looked at us and put Himself into our shoes. Right? That's the story. And so He says, as little Christians, you are to see people with dignity and love, and put yourself into their shoes. Guys, this isn't easy. If it's easy, everyone would do it. But it is a challenge. And so one of the ways we do it is we receive that truth from God, and then we express it from us. And we, above all, this is just the Christian walk. We follow Christ's example. Follow Christ's example. And you're going to mess up, and you're going to fall down, and your elephant's going to take over and just smash the fences and all sorts of things. It's okay. We continually come back. God, your kingdom come, and your will be done. There's a reason He tells us to pray that every day, not once a week. We need it every day. Some of us, Team Donut, we need it several times a day. We need to just do it over. You stand up and we'll finish with this. If you don't mind, we'll stand and pray. Come to an end. I love this verse. It's so challenging. John 13:34-35 says this. A new commandment, Jesus is talking to those who will follow Him, says this. To love one another just as I have loved you. You are also to love one another, right? We look at Jesus as the example. We receive it from Him. And then we give it to others. And I just love this. He's like, you want to know how to really be the church? It's not have more television shows. It's not have bigger churches. It's not have greater cultural influence. That's not what He's calling us to do. He's always calling us to this sentence right here. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples. The way we prove to everyone around us and the way that we live out the truth of being followers of Jesus is this, that we love one another. This is what we're striving for, guys. During this season of, political fervor, let this verse ring in your mind. God, help me to be your disciple. To above all, I'm going to get my priorities straight. The first thing I do is to recognize the dignity and the respect that is deserved by everyone, to treat them with love, and to allow your truth to shine through me, that I'm your disciple by the way that I love one another. And then have your political discourse. But have it, but this is the foundation. God, you're good to us. And when we get things wrong, you don't give up on us. And God, in this room, I know we come from all sorts of different backgrounds. We have all sorts of different views, and some of us, politically and morally, and even snack choice. But God, when we come to you, you don't see the categories that we fit into. You see us as people. And you treat us with love and dignity. Lord, help us to accept that. Some of us in this room have a really hard time accepting your love and even trusting or believing in that. Lord, help us to receive that from you, and then help us to give that to others, first and foremost. And help us as your church to represent you more than we represent political parties or anything else that could divide us, any kind of tribe that we belong to. Help us first and foremost to represent you, treating people with love and dignity, and to reflect the goodness of who you are by the way we love one another. So God, I pray a prayer of blessing on your church, on everyone here that has come into this place. You brought us here on purpose and with purpose. So I pray your blessing would rest on them, that you would bless them and keep them and make your face to shine upon them. That you lift up your countenance on them and give them rest and peace. Be gracious to each and every one of us and give us the strength to love one another as you've loved us. And we pray these things in the powerful name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Guys, I love you. Thank you for being here today. And let's be the church that God's calling us to be, especially during this politically divisive time.